Are we ahead of where you thought we would be? Are we on track?
You know, it was 2012. And so we've been sort of in it for, going on almost a decade. And
wow.
I guess it's like one of those things where in some ways, like, you know, we believed in this was our vision sort of the future. I think in some ways we're ahead of where we thought we'd be, and some ways behind. I think like we were thinking, you know, in 2014, 15, and 16, there was a lot of chatter that like Wall Street's coming into Bitcoin, and it really did not happen. And it's totally fine because it's been very much an individual revolution, and Bitcoin, at least in our view, is all about empowering the individual. It's really why we built Gemini to get people into the Bitcoin world, and this alternative system that we believe creates greater choice, independence, and opportunity. I think once you don't have alternatives, or you're locked into a system or jailed into it, that's really not great for the individual and empowerment. And so, look, I think in some ways it's amazing to see sort of what's happened, and it's at times surreal. Sometimes you wake up and you're like, wow, this has actually happened. You know, you're in a big way. But there's the other part of me says, like, we're so early. I mean, I want to use the baseball metaphor, but I know I need to use like a cricket, like the first wicket or whatever. We're literally just getting started. We're like right. 1/10 of the way to the $10 trillion market cap.
Oh, and then you look at what's happening to the dollar, the Fed, the debt burdens, the money spending, the money printing that's been happening before the pandemic for the last decade. And then what's been happening to get us through that. So you see what's happening over here. You see Elon Musk doing this, Jack Dorsey making these moves over there. It starts to become completely irresponsible not to at least have a story. Like, maybe your positions were not ready, but you have to have thought about it. I think if you have cash on your balance sheet, if you're a CEO, and I actually think that, like, you know, this I can't remember if it was last year or this year, but the corporate treasury putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet started, right? At some point, those dominoes will continue to fall. And like Cameron said, Fortune 500 companies, all of them will have something, right? And then at some point, a central bank will fall. Central banks, their muscle memory has been to stack gold. Even when they say everything's happening, everything's fine, this is normal, all this money printing, no big deal, this, you know, nothing to see here. Don't listen to what they say, look at what they do. And their balance sheets, they've been stacking gold. Okay, so that behavior, you know, doesn't indicate that everything's okay to me, right? Because they're getting this hard money. And then they'll discover that the hardest money in the galaxy is Bitcoin. So at some point, there will be a central bank that starts putting Bitcoin on its balance sheet. So when you think of, and then it's just bananas, right? And when you think of how early we are in the corporate treasuries doing this, and then the fact that central banks will do this because this behavior, they do it with gold. And if you do it with gold, you are going to do it. It's not an if, it's a when. I see a path to 10 trillion very easily. But as we know, Bitcoin's a lot more than just a metal. An open source project, gold built for the internet, it can do so much more. So, you know, we published that thought piece of the case for 500,000 Bitcoin, but it's conservative. It could be a lot more.
Yeah, and look, I think there's also like even some intermediate steps, right? There's pension funds, and then there's sovereign wealth funds, which are sort of a proxy. You know, the state would be like the LP of that, or the central bank. I'm sure they all have slightly different structures, but there are some really innovative and brilliant sovereign wealth funds out there. You know, Singapore, Temasek, and all that stuff. These guys and gals are all long. You know, they're long tech. They understand that. They're out on the curve, on the frontier. So it's just really a matter of time. But it's going to be mad dashes, as Tyler mentioned. I mean, I every once in a while I remind people on Twitter that there's only 21 million Bitcoin, and there's 46 million millionaires on the planet right now. There's not a full Bitcoin to go around. You don't want to be the millionaire who's not in that 21 million bucket. then you're no longer going to be a millionaire, right? And it's like being at a party, the music stops. You got to find that seat, and buying Bitcoin is like buying a pro rata seat on this network of money, the store of value network, and really time is of the essence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One other thing is you're starting to see a lot of these big banks like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Boney get into Bitcoin. That's all driven by their customers. Their private wealth customers are seeing what's happening with the price of Bitcoin. They're like, how do I get exposure? They're like, we don't know. We don't know how to do it.
All the announcements coming out are that these banks are allowing their wealthy clients to buy Bitcoin. That's the announcement.
They're freaking out because the wealthy clients are seeing they're seeing the price of Bitcoin, the best performing asset of the last decade. It's going to be the best this decade, and they can't touch it. So that's driving it. That's what drives all these banks. Is ultimately it's the business case and the demand from their customers. And so. Yeah, as the price keeps going up, like everybody's like, what are we doing here? The risk is sitting on the sidelines. The risk is doing nothing. I think that's the ultimate, like people are like, oh, how do you get comfortable with Bitcoin and holding Bitcoin? Like, how do you get comfortable not holding Bitcoin? Like, that's so much more risky. I would never take that bet over the last decade or the next decade or the one thereafter. So like, and that the way I think about it, the way you think about it, Peter, the way Cameron thinks about it, that's rapidly becoming the way everyone thinks about it. They're like, wait, I don't have chips on the table. That's kind of reckless and insane.
Bitcoin's a simple idea when you boil it down. It's go long the future of store of value money, the future, reserve currency. Yes, you're gonna literally hodl it for years. Don't look at it. And you're going to ask someone to, collect a fee on that advice. It's kind of a hard sell. And so I think a lot of the resistance sometimes is this baked in belief of diversification and portfolio construction, and people, making those straightforward, simple bets on the future sometimes become elusive in those environments. So I think that's part of it. And I think there may be a belief that, a little bit of a resistance, right? In people who have been in capital markets for 20 years and they sort of climbed the mountain, they learned, became experts at what they do. And then all of a sudden there's this new thing over here and it requires you to walk down the mountain and learn again. And stomaching that and becoming like a beginner, a total noob where you can't just like, reach back on years of experience. It's very humbling. I mean, I get humbled by Bitcoin on a daily basis.